On the first day of Advent, I found under the tree Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Master System. This is a really fantastic game. It's the most primitive programming wise that Sonic the Hedgehog has ever been, but it works. The game design, it's not fair to call it a stripped down equivalent of what was existing on the Mega Drive original. They knew the limitations of the Master System and they said, hey, we're going to make a fast game where you can run, jump and roll really quickly, and the level design's a bit simpler, but it has charm oozing out of every pore. Bridge zone, jungle zone, really simple concepts, but actually the Mega Drive game is lesser for not having those stages. And no, I would pick this up and replay it any time. It's even easier to get into than the Mega Drive, which I love. On the second day of Advent, I found under the tree the movie Stardust, which is based on the book written by Neil Gaiman. Now, I'd be happy with the book or the movie, but just the movie, it's a pretty good adaptation. They do change things. They change a lot from the books. They're very different beasts. This is a lot more cheerful. People think of fairy tales. There's two types of fairy tales. There's the happy ever after Disney style fairy tales, and then if you think of the darker stuff by the Brothers Grimm, I'd say Stardust exists in both forms. The movie is the happy ever after one, which is fine. It's campy, but all the actors are doing a really good job. It's got everything that matters. It's short, it's sharp, it's sweet. I'd watch this movie. It's feel-good cinema, but it's not stupid feel-good cinema. It's got a really strong, clever through line, and I love the main actors playing it, so I'd watch this any day. On the third day of Advent, I found American Idiot by Green Day under the tree. Now this is a really good, it's an important album for me. It came out at a time when I was becoming much more politically aware of what was going on in the world. So I suppose it is dated, and someone coming to it either from earlier or later might not be reached in the same way. But Green Day, for me, this is the peak Green Day ever reached to. And there are songs here that are genuinely good regardless of the time they came out. That Run, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Are We the Waiting, St. Jimmy, all the way through to She's a Rebel, and Wake Me Up When September Ends. There's something for everyone. It's really good emotional music. It's got a message, but you can also turn off and just enjoy and let the fun, and that beat, that bass, that just gets in your soul. It's really unclassifiable, and if I feel down, I'll put this album on and instantly get a pickup. It's brilliant. On the fourth day of Advent, I found Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson under the tree, and I absolutely adore this book. I absolutely adore the entire series, the Stormlight Archive, which this is the third book in. They are weighty books. This one's it's a brick and a half. Reading this is a massive undertaking. I wouldn't say anyone should undertake it lightly, but it is fulfilling payoff from beginning to end. Brandon Sanderson weaves his plots magnificently, and I was reading the conclusion of this book in bed, 1 o'clock in the morning, unable to sleep because I just had to see how it ends. And at the end of this book, there's a scene where, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a scene where a character expresses his guilt, and what should have been horrible was just a moment of life-affirming. We've all done horrible stuff, but it's payoff. It's payoff, and it's brilliant. On the fifth day of Advent, I found World of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck under the tree. Now this is a really good Sega Mega Drive Genesis game. It's fantastic whether it's played alone or it's got a really smart collaborative two-player mode. The game actually subtly changes the level design, changes the layout. Either Mickey Mouse or Donald have different abilities, but if you play as both of them, you can access all areas. I used to play this with my brother, and it's really fun to explore. It takes aspects from across a whole range of different Disney movies and puts them together in a very tight, very brilliantly designed, perhaps a little bit slow-paced, but constantly inventive platformer. Anyone looking for an old-school platformer that doesn't get the love and attention it deserves, people should remember this game. It's such a shame that Disney games are so difficult to get the rights for these days. On the sixth day of Advent, I found the official strategy guide for Final Fantasy X under the tree. Now, there are a lot of very large, very big role-playing games out there that are actually, it's not that they're difficult to complete, but they have secrets in them. Secrets right the way throughout the adventure, and strategies that, if you put the correct build of character sets together, will make the game really fun and exciting. And if you want to get 100% completion, if you want to see everything that a game as massive as Final Fantasy X has to offer, the most stylish way to do it was using a book like this. Now, the best official strategy guides weren't just instructions, they were works of art. They were really clever, smart, just great things to pick up and flick through and read. You could get the same information off the internet, but it's just not as good as this. On the 7th day of Advent, I found Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the book by Susanna Clarke, under the tree. And this is a really good book. It's historical fantasy. Now, it's fantasy, high concept fantasy, in which it features magic, but it's set in the world that we'd recognise, but going back a couple of hundred years. So you can correlate a lot of stuff that happens to it with real history and things that actually happened, only they didn't happen like this. Napoleon was not beaten by an English magician, he was beaten by an army. But you can tie that plot together. It's really intelligent. The twist at the end and the way it all works out. Oh, Susanna Clarke has put together a fantastic read, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into this again after I enjoyed it so much the first time round. On the 8th day of Advent, I found under the tree Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition. And I'm glad, because Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, it's not high definition, but it is the best version of Resident Evil 4, which is potentially one of the best Resident Evil games. It was a complete reinvention of the franchise after the first 3. Well, actually, it was more like the 7th or 8th Resident Evil game. There have been quite a few spin-offs and side stories. But after the original trilogy on the PlayStation 1 era, the Capcom signed an exclusivity deal with Nintendo. They released Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube, and it had a completely new control scheme, new design, and they changed things. It's scary, but it's also action-adventure. Now, this went a little bit weird, but when it then got ported to PS2 and then to the Wii, and the Wii had motion controls, and it worked really well. On the 9th day of Advent, I found under the tree the album The Scarecrow by Tobias Sammet's Apprentice. I absolutely adore Apprentice and Tobias Sammet. He used to be a bass player, but then he actually became more famous as the singer of the band Dag Guy. And Apprentice is his side project, which may now be his main project. But he gets together with the best singers from the best bands. He gets good drummers and good guitarists, but it's clear to see that the vocals is where his passion is. This guy wants to be the next Bon Jovi, and he probably also wants to work with Bon Jovi. He gets together a really good array of different musicians, including like famous names like Alice Cooper features on this album for a one-off character and a one-off song. Tobias Sammet, it's metal music, but it's really prioritizes the melody in strong singers, and it's great. On the 10th day of Advent, I found the Wii version of Xenoblade Chronicles under the tree, and this game almost never came to the West. It was teased as a game called Monado, the sword that ended the world, or something to that effect, and it was produced in Japan. And then Nintendo of America decided that they didn't want to port it, they didn't want to bring it here. So Nintendo of Europe brought it over, and they got a British cast to the voice acting, and I love it for that. A lot of people say it's a bit schlonky, a little bit corny. Of course it is. It's a relatively cheaply adapted and dubbed Japanese role-playing game, but they're so expressive, and it's got such a good story. The concept that that there are people, normal-sized people, that live on a giant titan that is solidified and turned to stone, and there's a battle between the two races and these two titans. It's expertly told. On the 11th day of Advent, I found under the tree a copy of Final Fantasy VII Voices of the Lifestream, a printed version that I got from Overclocked Remix when they were doing a Kickstarter drive to try and promote and raise funds for their version of Balance and Ruin, the album they produced for Final Fantasy VI. And I largely went in and backed that Kickstarter because I saw that they were offering on the higher reward tiers the ability to get printed, officially licensed from Square Enix, copies of their remix of the soundtrack of Final Fantasy VI and VII and some other albums. Now, Voices of the Livestream, for me, this was the album that got me into OC Remix. This was the album that made me go, this website is fantastic, and a lot of stuff they do is fantastic. The music's freely available online. I'd highly recommend anyone goes out. It's a full remix of almost every song in the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. Get it! On the 12th day of Advent, I found a copy of Timesplitters 2 for the Nintendo GameCube under the tree. And I've played Timesplitters 2 on the GameCube, I've played it on the PS2, and it's fantastic whatever console you play it on. This is possibly the best multiplayer first-person shooter game. Local multiplayer, I'll qualify that with. But I used to go to LAN parties, and just the sheer inventiveness and audacity and everything that this game, it was just exciting. It was fun to play. It really wanted people to mess around with it. And the concept of just taking characters from across history, firing everything at the wall and letting people just take what they think is fun, what they think could be amusing, put it all out, see what sticks. It was a brilliant idea for a franchise. It meant that it never got old, it never got repetitive, it never got boring, which a lot of FPS games do, but not this one. I'll never get bored of this one. On the 13th day of Advent, I found under the tree a copy of Doctor Who, the complete first series, from when it was re-released under Russell T Davies' guidance in 2005, and I absolutely adored Chris Eccleston's single year playing the Doctor in this long-running franchise. Now, this was a relaunch of an old science fiction show that had been running from the 1960s almost up to the 1990s. Then it had been cancelled and taken off the air for many years, but they brought it back, and they brought it back with aplomb. But the weird thing about the DVD box set is they had this horrid idea that it would be fun to put the DVDs in a box designed to look like the TARDIS, the police box from the show. So it occupies so much shelf space on the shelf, and the box is just full of dead space, and the glue inside it's not particularly great. I love the inventiveness and the idea of saying, well, let's just not just make it a DVD box, let's make it an exhibitor's item, but come on BBC, you can do better. On the 14th day of Advent, I found under the tree a copy of Ecco the Dolphin, Defender of the Future for the Sega Dreamcast. I loved the Ecco games on the Sega Mega Drive. Ecco the Dolphin and the sequel, Tides of Time. They're really excellent, but dated. They are of their time. I suppose Defender of the Future is of its time as well. But this is the last adventure we get where you could actually get to play as the Dolphin. And you've really got to judge this more as a puzzle game than an action one. It tries to do a few action things, but what it really wants you to do is to take your time to explore the underwater world and just have a look around. And although I've only ever completed it once, I'm probably not going to complete it again, not anytime soon. It is brilliant just to pick up and play and pretend that you are a dolphin. Swimming underwater should be fun, and these games have always managed it. On the 15th day of Advent, I found under the tree a CD by Madness, a band from the 1980s, which came back in the late 20s, 2009, to produce a new album, their first in over a decade, called The Liberty of Norton Folgate. And this is really weird. This is a boy pop band in the 80s. They've grown up, they've turned into old men, but they haven't lost the love for music, they haven't lost the soul. I suppose you'd call it ska pop. Music, but that riff of the piano, the combination of the piano, the drums and the jazz and that funky beat, but it all fits together really well. And this is an album about the love of London. And I've only ever briefly lived on the outskirts of the city of London, but I spent a lot of time there. I know that place, and this album is just an absolutely brilliant, it's a mission statement for the city, and it works really well. On the 16th day of Advent, I found my copy of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker under the tree. Now, this game originally came out from the Nintendo GameCube, and it had a massive furore. There was a lot of kickback because Nintendo had gone for a really kiddie CGI, cel-shaded look and turned Link into a child. But it was actually a really epic adventure. It was really fun to play. The cel-shading in action looked absolutely beautiful. But I was lucky enough to get the limited edition of this, which came out in Power Regions, which also had a copy of Ocarina of Time. Now, I had played Ocarina of Time. I visited my friend's house and they had an N64, and I'd enjoyed playing it, but I'd never completed it for myself. I'd never picked it up from the beginning and done a complete playthrough. So The Wind Waker was, for me, two of the best Zelda games ever, at least for the era. On the 17th day of Advent, I found a copy of Elfstones of Shannara by Terry Brooks under the tree. And Terry Brooks, I love Terry Brooks because he was one of the authors that really got me into the fantasy genre. They're a little simple, he doesn't often do stuff that really surprises you. It's classic high fantasy. But his first book, The Sword of Shannara, really can be accused of just being Lord of the Rings light. But the second book, and when I was originally introduced to him, they gave me the first two books, Sword and Elfstones, and this second book is where things start to deviate and actually starts to show a little bit of originality. I really adored the Shannara series growing up, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it at some point and trying to read through it all again. He's been writing continuously, never really stopped, for several decades now. But these early books, they set and created a world that went really fitted together very well. On the 18th day of Advent, I found my copy of the Sonic Adventure original soundtrack, Digi-Log conversions. Now this is a 2 CD set which features the soundtrack by Jun Sunu and others at Sega that came out with the game in 1999, and it's an absolutely fantastic soundtrack. I'd listen to this away from the game anytime. Jun Sunu almost works the guitar into every single song, and it's cheesy, but it's rock music at its finest. This is just fun to learn. It's energizing. It really brings the game alive. And if you can get into that spirit of just the chugging guitars and the roaring spirit of adventure, this is great music to drive to. It makes you feel like you're on the open road. So I can't imagine anything bringing Sonic into the Millennium better than this music, and I'll listen to it any day. On the 90th day of Advent, I found Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb under the tree. I love Robin Hobb. She's one of my favourite authors. And The Assassin's Apprentice is the first book of a trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, which, I said, there's other authors that got me into fantasy, but it was Robin Hobb that made me go, this is worth it. This is where I'm sticking. This is a genre that I adore. These books chronicle a guy called Fitz, and this book takes him right the way from childhood to his teenage years, and it's about his life story. This is a real personal autobiography of someone going through a horrific cast, but there's some really exciting high drama plots going on behind the scenes. For me, Robin Hobb is probably the most engrossing fantasy author of the last 30 years, predating Brandon Sanderson, and I've loved almost everything she's done. On the 20th day of Advent, I found under the tree the Metroid Prime Trilogy re-release collector's edition for the Wii. Now, Metroid Prime was one of my favourite GameCube games. I liked it, and I really liked its sequel. I didn't like Metroid Prime 3 so much for the game as a complete experience, but it brought to the Waggle generation a control scheme where you could point and shoot and aim with the controller. And the Wii really should have had better first-person games on it, and this really proved that for FPS games where you can point and aim at what you want to shoot at, it works really well. So when they ported the first two games to the Wii as well, they added that control scheme from the third game back into the first two games, and it elevates them, it made them even better. Two of the best games from that generation, made better and brought together as a complete trilogy, a complete package. This possibly was the best single Wii game because it had three fantastic titles. On the 21st day of Advent, I found under the tree the album Imaginaerum by Nightwish, which I absolutely adore. Nightwish are very famous in Europe, but not so much in the UK, and I'm really glad that I was introduced to them many years ago. They do seem to go through lead singers and then take hiatuses every time they change between them. Imaginaerum was the album conceptually is about the imagination, and so each song is designed just to evoke a feeling, an idea, a story. There's stuff here about the fear of the circus, there's stuff here about mermaids, there's stuff here about riding in American Midwests and ghost rivers and just storytelling. It evokes so many images. This is music designed to evoke pictures and images and feelings, and it does it with a metal orchestra at its best. On the 22nd day of Advent, I found under the tree the album The Human Equation by Aryan. Now this is Arjen Johanson's passion project, the Aryan project, and The Human Equation for me is his finest work. This is a double album which chronicles the story of a guy who's fallen into a coma. He's dreaming and trying to work his way through his life right up to the car crash which has put him into this coma, Whilst outside his in the hospital, his wife and his best friend are consoling each other and asking what they should do, and more importantly, do they blame each other for the fact he's had this car crash. So there's a mystery here. The story works its way up to that mystery beautifully, and although there's a tragedy in this, it's ultimately an uplifting story about forgiveness, about being true for yourself, about recognising the flaws in yourself and working to overcome them so that we can be better people with each other. I love it. On the 23rd day of Advent, I found under the tree Lara Croft Tomb Raider Anniversary for the Wii. I loved most of the Tomb Raider franchise. It's a really exciting series, but the first 5 or actually 6 games, they were designed by a company called Core Design. They had tank controls, they used a very bespoke engine that was specific to the Tomb Raider franchise. It's never been really successfully replicated to franchise level anywhere else. But after the 6th game was an unmitigated disaster on the PS2, Core Design lost the franchise and it was given over to Crystal Dynamics, who produced Tomb Raider The Legend, which was a fun game. It showed a new engine, it showed it could work, but it was a bit short for me. But within a year of Tomb Raider Legend, we got an anniversary, a full-on remake of the original game, and it was really good. The new engine reproducing a game that was 10 years old at that point. Only this version, this is on the Wii, and it brought in waggle gestures, and some games did waggle wrong, but this game for me did it spot on. On the 24th day of Advent, I found under the tree a book called The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, which is the second book of his King Killer Chronicles. This is an excellent series. I could have happily found the first book as well, but I've read that recently, so I'm happy to pick up the second book and carry on where the story goes. But again, these are featuring one main character called Quofe, and it follows him. There's a bit of Harry Potter in there, and it follows him going to an academy where he learns magic and other things. But there's much more going on here. It's a deeply political, dark story that's got a lot of intrigue going on. The whole point of this is there's a revenge quest as he wants to strike back against the people who killed his parents and family. So there's a lot of dark undertones here, but the writing, Patrick Rothfuss's writing is absolutely beautiful. He's a master at the craft. He knows exactly how to sell the ideas he wants to, and the story has a lot of really interesting turns in it. Thank you for watching, and if you want to, like and subscribe for more feature-length content.